Hi everyone. My name is Kira Ennis. I'm the director of Pitzer College Art Galleries, and I'm delighted to welcome you today for the 6th in our Stay at Home with Pitzer College Art Galleries series. This series is a partnership between the galleries and the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement. We are especially grateful to the director of that department, Brandon Kyle, and to the coordinator, Brooke Butler, for their collaboration and for their camaraderie. Thank you both so much. I know that Brandon's not here, but please pass that on, Brooke. It's been great working with you. I'd also like to thank Associate Dean Susan Phillips and Managing Director Tricia Morgan from the Center for Community Engagement, as this is also a collaboration with the CUC and is part of our series dedicated to alums working at the intersection of art and social justice. And finally, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Chris Michno, Exhibitions and Communications Manager of Pitzer College Art Galleries, for his help with all aspects of these events. So today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Ana Iwataki, a curator, writer, and organizer who graduated from Pitzer in 2011 with a BA in art history. Ana went on to get an MA in curatorial studies from the Sorbonne University in Paris, and has just started a doctoral program in comparative studies in literature and culture at USC. Today, Ana will be discussing the intersection of curatorial practice and activism as it relates to her recent work with the ACLU and the Japanese American community in Little Tokyo. Issues around gentrification, social justice, and settler colonialism will be discussed. Ana will be in conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Bill Anthes, who is a professor in the Pitzer College Art Field Group and teaches courses in contemporary art and native North American art, with a particular interest in art as it relates to animals, the environment, and racial justice. His most recent book, Edgar Hooper Birds, was published by Duke University Press in 2015. He's also the co-editor of the catalog for the exhibition Dakota Modern, The Art of Oscar Howe, which will open at the New York City branch of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian next year in the fall. So this conversation will last about 15 minutes and will be followed by 10 minutes of questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask something, please send it to me in chat and I will pass it along to Ana and Bill during the question time. So again, we are really thrilled to welcome both of you here today. Thank you for your time and your willingness to do this. And please join me, everyone, in giving Ana and Bill a huge round of applause. Thank you.
Well, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. And hey, Ana, it's good to see you again, kind of.
Good to see you too.
Definitely good to see you, but we're only kind of seeing you, I guess my point is.
Mm-hmm.
It's great for you to agree to come back and talk to us about what you've been doing in the 9 years since you left Pitzer. And I was wondering if we could start by having you say a bit about your time at Pitzer, classes that were influential, other activities you were involved with, some internships, the kinds of things that set you on the path that you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Kira and Chris and Bill, for inviting me to do this and, for being in conversation with me. Bill, you were my advisor at Pitzer, and it's, and you've continued to be like a really wonderful mentor figure for me in the years since then. And so this is, it's nice to be able to talk about how I've gotten from there to here with you and to be connected to Pitzer in this way. I've been really appreciating learning about about alumni who are working in the arts who I didn't know about before. So yeah, thank you again, Kira. At Pitzer, I came in more or less knowing that I wanted to be an art history major. I had already done one internship at a museum in high school. And so I was lucky to kind of have a focus from the very beginning. I convinced you to let me into your already full class during my second semester, because I was dead set on taking Art Since 1960, which was your class in contemporary art. And it was a real introduction for me to, to recent art history. I had some idea that I wanted to be a curator, and I kind of knew what that meant, but not really. And taking that class, taking, I took many classes with you, but taking that class in particular, and I think the Native American art history class really shaped my understandings of what the conversations in the field were and how I might begin to imagine contributing to it. And then I continued to do internships during my entire time at Pitzer. One that was really had a very lasting impact on me was with Pilar Tompkins Rivas at the Claremont Museum of Art when it was still there. I actually worked on a monographic exhibition of Bastian Otter, which ended up being shown at the Pitzer Art Galleries. And then I ended up writing about him in my thesis. So that really, kind of set me on a path. And then I closed out my time at Pitzer with another internship with Kira. The summer after I graduated, I did the Getty multicultural internship at the Pitzer Art Galleries. And it was a really wonderful way to transition from the world of Pitzer to, the world after Pitzer. And Kira really treated me as if I were already a colleague in some sense. And the two exhibitions that I worked on were really, the one that was happening in the galleries was with Alex Uhas, whose work I've continued to follow, and then the work that I kind of did more preparatory stuff also included artists whose work I've continued to be interested in. So it was, thank you for that. Activities, I was also the co-editor of The Other Side, which was great. I was actually just talking about this with somebody. I learned so much from having to try to discern at 19 years old, what should be published and how to make things look good next to each other, and how to make connections between words and images and other people's work, and how to negotiate a printing deadline with a printer, and how to use InDesign. Actually, another really class that I really learned a lot from was my class with you, Mark. It was the only art class that I ever took, and I learned how to use InDesign in it. I learned how to solder, and we also, you ended up also being on my thesis committee. Actually, my entire thesis committee is here: Bill, Kira, and Mark. And you've also been someone who's continued to be a presence in my life and work, and so Pitzer had a very serious impact on what I did afterwards and what I'm still doing.
I know you weren't only in California, though. You also spent some time abroad, and
Yes.
If you could tell us a little bit about that, where you went and what that kind of led you to in terms of your further study and folks that you ended up working with.
Yes. So I studied abroad during my junior year in Nantes, in France, and I ended up moving to France right after finishing my internship, basically. So I moved there in August after graduating in May, and I stayed for 5 years. Pilar, who I interned with at the Claremont Museum of Art, actually put me in touch with a French curator there. And I worked with her, and she was really my introduction to what the French art world was, because I really had no idea how to find art or how to find artists. And that was another like occasion to work with Mark. He did a project with her at the art center that she was the curator at the time. And then I went back to school. I went to the Sorbonne to study curatorial studies. And that was really where I got a much better sense of the people in France who I wanted to work with. I kind of found my peers there, because before that, I kind of was only aware of an art scene that was a little bit older than me. And through school, I was able to find a community and like kind of get the confidence to make things on my own. So that's when I started like kind of identifying as an independent curator, trying in whatever way I could to make my own projects happen. And right after I finished school, I started co-running an independent space in Paris. And that was also like just an amazing education, you know, trying to figure out how to fund a space, how to pay rent, how to convince artists to come to Paris to make work with these young people who had no money. So yeah, it really, and I still have like very close collaborative relationships with those people.
I think some of those connections were evident in the most recent project of yours that I saw. This was the show that you mounted at Lace about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who are listening who don't know Lace, it's Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions in Hollywood. And but you were also working with a French foundation. Is that correct?
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that project?
Sure. So I started working for the Flax Foundation, French Los Angeles exchange here in LA when I got back. It's a foundation that actually just closed this year, but there was a residency program that kind of fueled the rest of the programming. And one of the last exhibitions was this group exhibition at Lace that I co-curated with Anna Malone. And it brought together artists from France. So they kind of, you know, like thinking about like what a French artist is an interesting thing, right? So there's Colombian artists who are based in France, French artists living outside of France, and then LA artists who all, we were interested in something that was actually just in the LA Times this week because of the fires, this concept called solastalgia that an Australian philosopher named Glenn Albrecht coined to kind of describe the feeling of the uncanny feeling of dissociation and seeing that a place that was familiar become unfamiliar through something like gentrification or climate change. And that exhibition was kind of an attempt to look at our relationship to nature and trace it back to the Enlightenment and kind of figure out where we went wrong.
Were there any particular projects in that show that were really interesting to you or particularly exciting? Or?
Yeah, actually the one that I think about the most was a collaboration between Iris Urihu, who's one of the artists in the show, with Andrew Frere, who was the exhibition manager. They worked together to create kind of a library or a structure that would act as a platform for not only all the textual references that we were using as curators, and we discovered that the artists were also like drawing inspiration from, but also non-traditional forms of holding and transmitting knowledge. So they built the structure using recycled materials from previous exhibitions at Lace. They kind of wanted to highlight, you know, the institutional knowledge that goes into making an exhibition, like, you know, knowing the space, knowing, yeah, just the kind of stuff that goes unseen when you're just looking at the art, and the material impact of an exhibition itself. And in that structure, we were able to present things like plant tinctures made by Candace Lynn, lava rocks that were given to us by Beatriz Cortez, and as well as like books and images that the artist gave us. And it was a really, I don't know, I thought it was an exciting way for me to think about kind of an exhibition in a more holistic way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it became, or it was evident that there was a bigger conversation, which you don't normally get to see as a visitor to an exhibition unless you get to talk to the curator or spend time with the artist. It was interesting the way that you opened that up and made it part of the experience. I remember there were quotes from the shared reading list in the space, and it was exciting because a lot of the things you were reading were things that I've been excited about in the last several years as well. And it was an exciting thing to see, not just because it was you know, material that was so fascinating, but also because it was seeing what you've been doing over the past several years. One of the other things that you told me about recently that I think is really interesting is the work that you were doing, consulting and doing curatorial work with the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California. And I'm hoping you could talk about that project as well, because that's really exciting.
Yeah, it really has been so wonderful to work on. And it's really like kind of helped me think about how else art can exist in the world, what else it can do, how else I can make work. I was connected to them through a public art consultant who I had been working for. And once they approached, you know, the ACLU of Southern California knew that they wanted to include art in their activities somehow. They had done kind of one-off projects before, like they did like a calendar fundraising project where artists gave them images for that. But the idea of, I ended up working with them to create a residency with the idea that bringing an artist in at the very beginning to bring their unique perspective as to how art could be used rather than conceiving an artistic project without an artist in the room would be a much more fruitful way of, you know, it just would be more interesting and more generative. So with them, I kind of just, you know, talked to them about what their issue areas were, how they might imagine art being part of that. And then I was really inspired by a program that that LA County does, where they integrate an artist into a department for an entire year and they pay them like a normal salary. It's called the Creative Strategist Program. And so I wanted it to be like that as much as possible. And so we put out we drafted kind of that vision and put out a call that was open to artists anywhere in Southern California. And then I helped them go through the selection process. And then we ended up choosing to work with Audrey Chan. And she's been really, really wonderful to work with. Now I, you know, just am so grateful that this first pilot program began with her. She has increasingly been using portraiture as a way to counteract like kind of historical hegemonic narratives. And she's been doing research into the archives of the ACLU of Southern California. We're actually coming up on their centennial. And so this affiliate is separate from the national affiliate and has its own separate history of like how it started and who the major players were. And so she's been really digging into that, and also getting to know all the different campaigns and all the different team members working on the campaigns, and talking to them about, what they have coming up and how she might be able to integrate into that work. So she's been, like, for example, during Pride Month, she did a series of portraits. During Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, she did a series of portraits. She's done she kind of like really helped make a visual campaign for some work, like anti-ice work. And then her residency is very quickly coming to an end at the end of this month. And she's working on a very big, exciting project that I cannot talk about yet, but it will be announced really soon. And it's, just using kind of everything that she's learned about this organization over the last year, with her strengths as an artist, plus what's going on, like obviously a lot of things changed since she began her residency last October, and so deciding where to put her energies and what the best use of this residency would be, like, shifted a lot. And I think everybody is really happy about where we ended up.
So what's the status of the program going forward?
It remains to be seen. I know that they're very happy with how this year has gone. I mean, like everyone else, we were just talking about, changing timelines and adjusting programming, and that's true for them as well. I think I can certainly say that their vision of what's possible through art has been greatly expanded, and I know that they definitely want to keep on this path. And especially, like, the archives are amazing. Like, there really is so much there, and it could be like just a huge other project for somebody. I think that's kind of like the next dream, but nothing is set yet.
How would you characterize what ACLU SoCal got from the experience? And what did they learn was possible by bringing an artist in this kind of capacity, rather than just having somebody design a tote bag or a calendar or something like that?
Yeah, I think that, seeing that it's important for an artist to really understand the work and understand, like, what the organization is and where the organization might want to go, is really, there's no replacement for that. And it can kind of only happen from seeing the way that they work, because it's, it's a very particular, it's just the amount of work that everyone has there, and the way the rhythm, the pace that they have to work at is very intense. And I think that having someone who's just, like, removed and is kind of just called on to see this, like, very small slice, it's difficult to put all the pieces together and understand how that image or that poster or that tote bag might fit into a larger narrative.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the role that art can play in bigger movements, and then thinking about the ways in which a curator can be a facilitator of those conversations, and those helping institutions imagine what art can do for them. Yes. And making those connections happen.
Yeah. I guess, sorry, I will say one more thing. We work with the communications team there, and so that's obviously, like, a very specific way in. And I think that understanding how a message can be shared through art is, it's something that really changed for them. And like, the impact and the like the different ways that, you know, they talk a lot about changing public perceptions, and especially because so much of their actual work is, you know, is legal work, and getting messaging out about what they're doing aside from like press releases or winning cases can be very challenging.
Mhm.
And Audrey has been, like, I think really transformative for that.
So I'm interested in this this kind of path you're on, trying to bring together your political commitments, your ethical commitments, and your work in the art world, which are things that a lot of folks imagine are kind of separate, and don't have a lot of crosstalk between the two of them. But I know you've worked with other organizations, community organizations, and done activist work yourself. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the Little Tokyo projects.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, before I dive into that, I will say that it has been like a pretty long and winding journey. And I mean, it's, you know, I'm still trying to figure out how to be an art worker in a way that I feel good about. Because for a long time, like, you know, just trying to get a sense of what the art world was and what a curator does and how one might exist in that space and in that role. It seemed to me like certain things had to be compromised or sacrificed in order to, like, to make it, or to, like, not even just like be successful, but just like to be there. Because it seemed to me that so many of the institutions were just like inherently flawed, and that certain things just like had to be accepted. And it made me like really question whether I wanted to work in art for a while. And yeah, I mean, again, it's like a slow process to figure out how to not think about art and politics or art and ethics separately. But yeah, so my connections to Little Tokyo have like absolutely helped with that. My first internship at 16 years old was actually at the Japanese American National Museum. Yeah, Little Tokyo like looms very large for me. And my, you know, I have a family member, my aunt, who's on this call, who is like a longtime activist, and like, you know, it's very rooted in Little Tokyo activism, but you know, like all struggles must, you know, it connects to like much broader issues. So when I moved back to the US, like, I know I moved back here in December 2016. So obviously that was already weird. And there was a lot of like art washing was kind of a big conversation going on in the LA art world. Art washing is like kind of looking at the role of artists and art spaces in gentrification, and kind of trying to acknowledge that you know, an art gallery or an art space will find affordable rent in a neighborhood and then just kind of like be the thing that lets everything else, you know, it opens the door for gentrification, basically. And it was difficult. I mean, it was very difficult to try to figure out how to place myself in that argument, and to think about, you know, like a relationship to this city, and to, you know, I also came back and felt like very kind of grumpy and upset about all the changes that had happened in Los Angeles since I left. Like, you know, between 2011 and the beginning of 2017, LA changed a lot, and the art scene changed a lot. And Yeah, I mean, it's like something that I'm still trying to figure out, but I'm trying to grapple with the understanding that like just because I'm from here, it doesn't give me like any more ownership over this place than anyone else. Just because I come from like communities of color doesn't mean that I still am not a beneficiary of like a lot of the really unjust systems that are at play in gentrification. And but anyway, so I got involved with a anti-gentrification struggle in Little Tokyo that was really interesting because it centered around an artist's loft. It was this artist loft called 800 Traction that had been around since the early 70s, that Japanese American artists had been living in and working in for, you know, all that time. And, you know, when they moved in, that where it is was considered Little Tokyo. It's now been rebranded as the Arts District. And, you know, it was just bought out by this huge developer, as was another artist loft not so far away. And so it was really eye-opening to be part of that. I mean, not only because it was like kind of my first like real organizing experience, but also because, you know, we tried to create coalition with a couple of other anti-gentrification movements in Los Angeles, but some were just immediately suspicious of us because they were artists. Even if they were artists, like, you know, there was like a 90-year-old artist who was living in that loft, but there was just so much vitriol and so much, like, people were angry and scared, and there was still like not enough acknowledgement on the part of artists about the impact that they could have on existing communities. So that was, yeah, it was a big, it was a turning point for me. And then that's continued into now, like now I'm part of Sustainable Little Tokyo's Arts Action Committee. And, you know, we've recently been having very difficult, but very, I don't know, they make me feel hopeful conversations about like what the responsibilities of artists and art workers are. And, you know, acknowledging that like the precarity of an artist's financial situation like can't excuse everything. Recently, like this conversation kind of got started because a Sustainable Little Tokyo shared a call for an artist to paint a mural on the Arts District Business Improvement District office. Kind of, and some of the artists in Sustainable Little Tokyo were pretty upset because BIDs, I mean, they kind of like hire their own private security forces to protect the interests of the businesses, but they're often, you know, that often means gentrifying businesses. It often means that they're, you know, treating unhoused folks like very badly. And so the opportunity for an artist to, you know, make $5,000, but kind of allow their work to be weaponized in the service of these other things, yeah, it just sparked really generative conversation. So it's a space that I'm very grateful for right now to, I don't know, just talk about these things and recognize that we don't have all the answers yet, but that, you know, we have to try to deal with it somehow. Oh, you're muted, Bill.
You describe yourself as hopeful after some of these conversations, and I'm wondering if you could say what it is you're hopeful about in terms of artists and art workers finding a way to make common cause with communities.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I think that, well, in Sustainable Little Tokyo's Arts Action Committee, for example, we want to kind of take the position that we'll take a strong stance on issues that might not seem to have a lot to do with what an Arts Action Committee should be concerned with, but that as artists and art workers, like we can try to push forward like the most radical agendas and try to be visionaries for a community, a city, and yeah, that just like, you know, maybe this space can be like truly creative and imagining better ways of being and better ways of making.
Do you see any points of comparison between the benefits of, say, embedding an artist with ACLU or another organization and embedding artists in community activist organizations and community organizing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wish that there could be positions for artists in like, you know, urban planning offices and, you know, just to have people there who, you know, they have to try to think of something that no one else has before, so people pay attention to them, right? So like, you know, let's, yeah, like try to harness that impulse. And sorry, that's a cynical way of putting that, but you know, just, yeah, there are other ways of doing things, and it's very clear that we can't continue to just like move along in the pre-existing grooves, and we have to turn to somebody to get us out of them. And I think that, you know, in my best moments, I think that artists can be those people.
Can you say a little bit more about how the Arts Action Committee came together as part of Sustainable Tokyo?
I actually don't know. I didn't start it. It's Sustainable Little Tokyo like brings together people of a few like existing community organizations, and I mean there's a real recognition that art and culture are part of what makes Little Tokyo have an identity, and yeah, and there are also just like quite a few artists in the Little Tokyo community, and there's like, you know, the Japanese American National Museum and the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, so there are already people doing community work that is also cultural work. So I think it's my understanding that it was just like pretty natural for it to come together. But yeah, I'm a fairly new member.
And is LA Mocha a player in any of these conversations?
You know, not that I know of. Not that I know. Yeah, not that I know of.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can see my aunt laughing.
Okay, maybe there's a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are you working on now, and where do you see yourself going with these things that you're starting to try to put together?
So, you know, like Kira mentioned, I just started a PhD program at USC like a month ago. So I'm a month in out of at least 5 years. I decided to go back to school for a few reasons. I mean, one, I'm kind of happy to have a little bit of distance from the art world right now and to not be so dependent on it for my livelihood, because it's, yeah, it's just like giving me the space that I need to figure out how I want to exist in it, and what, yeah, how, you know, just how I can work ethically and how I can work in like for the right reasons. And I also just wanted to like the time and the resources to think about some of these issues like with the rigor and that they deserve, because, you know, thinking about something like the the role of artists in gentrification or the role of exhibition making in climate change. Like that's not something that can be, you can't just figure that out in one exhibition. You can't figure it out in one essay. So yeah, I want the time to think about that and also like figure out how I even want to approach it and what my point of view can bring to that conversation, which is obviously not just my conversation. So.
Great. Maybe we could take time now to see if there are questions from folks who've logged in. And Kira, are you moderating questions?
Yes, I can do that for sure. We have two, one from, I think, your aunt, Ana Iwataki. I apologize if I've mispronounced your first name. And then after that, we have a question from Mark Allen. So Mia has asked, or rather she stated, pandemic, climate, social justice protests, a critical election, jobs, immigration, gentrification. How is the social climate impacting the art movement today?
I think it's hard to say it's impacting it in just one way, just because, you know, there are as many ways that it has impacted the art world as there are people within the art world. I think that maybe largely there is some sense that institutions have to change a little bit. They have to diversify. They have to not like continue to reproduce a system that is unjust, like, you know, because it is a reflection of larger society and that they were built by the same resources and by the same people who built, you know, everything else. But I think that how that realization plays out looks very different, or even like if that realization is like a true one or just, you know, begrudgingly accepting that's the case instead of like really believing it. Mm-hmm. And then also, I mean, I'm personally like quite worried about what the art scene will look like after this. You know, there are already so many wonderful independent spaces that have disappeared, and you know, I'm very worried that we'll be left with, you know, just kind of the big cockroaches. But you know, we'll see.
And Mark, please go ahead.
Hi, Anna. It's so great to hear you speak. I was thinking about what you had said when you had moved to Paris and felt like you had met kind of your generation of artists. And I do think curatorial practice can be very generational, and that it's about a relationship between a curator and a community. And I wondered if you could speak about your philosophy of that, of how much you intellectually are driven by the work that's happening, and how much do you look for work that attempts to explore a thread. So I don't know if that's clear, but it's like, how much is the practice driven by the artists that are part of your world, and how much is your research driven by looking at a set of circumstances that you want to explore?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. It's actually very hard for me to parse out which is which. At this point, so many of the people in my life are artists or curators or writers, and I spend a lot of time talking to them about everything. And so, you know, they'll say something and it'll get stuck in my head and I won't even know where it comes from after a while. And so I think like mutual influence is something that I'm like very interested in and very grateful for, because it's, you you know, I see what people around me are making and what people are interested in, and then on the flip side, like I can become interested in something and like all of a sudden see that I can find many other people who are interested in the same thing. So it's really trying to figure out like what's mine and what's someone else's, and where where something begins is like very difficult, but in a cool way, I think.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? How do you feel like, that totally makes sense how you're saying it. How do you feel like if a PhD is kind of a deep dive, how does that affect those relationships and where your interests follow, right?
Yeah, that I
guess it's a little early for the answer.
Yeah, unclear. But I mean, I think I've landed on a set of interests that are shared by certain of my peers and not at all by others, or like not explicitly by others. And I'm like, I like a lot of different kind of work, but the work that I'll choose to write about will probably be much like, it'll just like focus on a much narrower swath of of that.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from Jay Scott, who is a current student of art history. And they're wondering if you could talk about the transition out of school. As they say, I'm a junior and probably will not be able to study abroad before graduating. Do you think that study abroad was crucial for you?
No, not at all. It just happened for me that that's kind of like what the hinge was. I think what was much more important for me was doing internships and getting experience outside of school, where I could like figure out how what I was studying could be used in the real world, or like even to just like understand what a curator did, or like what different jobs were in the art world. That certainly was like the thing that was the most important. And like through that and through school, like building really solid relationships with mentors. And, you know, I was very lucky to be surrounded by quite a few people who I could turn to and be like, what do I do now? Like, how do I do this? Who should I talk to? What do I do? And that, the combination of those two things like really helped. And I mean, I was very lucky, I think, because kind of one internship would lead to me meeting somebody else, and that led me to applying to the master's program that I did, and that led me to meet, you know, it just kind of all started building off of this like foundation of internships and mentors.
And then we have a question from Leica. Hi, Leica. Thank you so much for attending today. And Leica's also done some curatorial work. And she says, what are your thoughts on curatorial studies programs and studying internationally versus locally?
Okay, well, I am happy I did the program I did for some reasons, and not at all happy about it for others. I mean, studying in France, I got a master's degree for like 250 euros, and that included healthcare. So that's huge, because most curatorial studies programs in the US are terminal MAs, and so you have to pay for them. Right now, I don't know if I recommend doing that to anybody. And I think that a lot of the things that you can learn from a curatorial studies program, you can also learn by being very curious and being very motivated, and like getting work experience and trying to figure out how to make shows yourself and talking to people. I just, want to be very transparent about like what it costs to go to school and what the job market is like right now and what it will be like for curators. So studying abroad is wonderful for that. There are like a lot of other really wonderful programs. I just happened to go to a school that was like fairly traditional. It's like the oldest university in France in the art history department, which is, like it was, just like a little old school. And a lot of the things that I took for granted from being at Pitzer, like, I don't know, like intersectionality and decolonial studies just was not part of that program. But that doesn't mean that that's going to be true of, other programs abroad.
Thank you.
So do we have any other questions for Ana? Don't think any more are coming through on the chat. Or any comments, perhaps? And if not, Ana, did you say that you had some images? Maybe it would be nice to finish with some images from a past exhibition or current past exhibition. We could see your work.
Sure. Let me just pull them up and then I'll start screen sharing. Yeah, I just have, they're not a lot.
And maybe you could talk through them.
Okay, can you all see that? Okay, so this is an installation view of the show that we were talking about earlier that was at LACE last year that I co-curated for the Flax Foundation. It's also the image that was used on this event, so I point of view. It was a big show. There were like kind of half French artists, half LA artists. You don't see it in this image, I'm sorry, but there was a 17th century oil painting in the exhibition, which was very scary for LACE to have in their space on Hollywood Boulevard for several months. This image that you see in the middle is that kind of like column is a work by Eddie Aparicio, who is an artist from Los Angeles who is about to have a show open at Commonwealth and Council, which is another space that I worked at. It opens this week. Yeah, this is just one image of the show. This is one of the portraits that Audrey made as part of like the campaign and research work. This was made during Pride Month. And so like these images got used in kind of multiple ways, but mainly were shared through social media. And then this is an image that's from this very large commission that will be installed in 2022 for the metro station in Little Tokyo. She really did a lot of work in like getting to know the community and understanding its history. And part of her work is, to get to the portraits that she makes. She builds relationships and she makes sure that she's representing people accurately, and she understands like who needs to be represented, which is, I think like that's really, such an important aspect of the work. It's like, who needs to be seen, and how should we see them? And then this is sorry, this is not an image of my work, but this is the 800 Traction committee outside of City Hall after we presented at a Cultural Heritage Commission meeting, trying to, yeah, it was just like an effort to stop just stop them from being evicted. But there are quite a number of artists who are in this photo, and yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was a nice way to represent that work for me. That's all. Those are all the images I have. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna. And actually, we just have one more question from Mark. Mark, do you want to go ahead and ask it?
Oh yeah, well, you were saying that, you sounds like you have an idea of the direction of the work you're focusing on or thinking about in the PhD, and I'm just curious what it is.
Oh, yeah.
View of where your brain's going to be for the next 5 years.
Yeah. So I've been interested in like the question of mutual influence and looking at it through metaphors of like digestion and fluidity and porosity, and that has led to an interest in water. I recently wrote an essay on Patty Chang's work and her like kind of strategy of looking at geopolitical issues related to water through the body and through the personal. And it was really like, it helped me clarify so much to write about her work. And so I'm thinking a lot about water as both a metaphor and a material, like thinking about its material history, particularly in California, and kind of using that as a way to think about my relationship to this place, to this city, and like how to grapple with like existing within like a settler colonial state as a person of color, and thinking about like how infrastructures and the things that make a place like livable affect the body and affect, yeah, so that's kind of like a broad, I don't know, that's what I'm thinking about. And I don't know at all which artists or what works or what texts I'll be focusing on. But yeah, right now I'm kind of in the stage of just like, following a thread and seeing like what fits in, and yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
So it's now 6 o'clock. So I just want to say thank you so much, Ana, for being with us today. And thank you so much, Bill. This conversation has been amazing. And I have so many questions that I will be asking you later, another time. But it's been great to hear about your most recent work, especially your activist practice. So I thank you both very much for being with us today and being part of this program. And thank you everybody for being here today and for joining us. And please come again to our next one. Thanks again.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, having people to ask about what I should do and what my next steps are was like so important to me. So if, Jay or like anybody else, if you want to contact me to like ask me more questions, like please feel free. But yeah, and yeah, thank you so much everybody for being in conversation with me and listening to me talk about myself.
And actually, your parents have said they're very, very proud of you, and your brother thinks you're pretty cool too. So I just want to make sure that you know that.
Thank
Okay.
you, family. Thank you so much,
Bye, everyone.
Bill. Kira.
Thank you so much.
See you both. See you, everyone. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.